What was happening is, while the government kept European Union business broadly on track, was the Conservative Party was having its own internal fight. Those internal fights culminated in David Cameron's January 23rd, 2013 speech, his long-promised kind of speech about Britain's relations with the European Union, in which he promised to hold an in or out of the European Union referendum by the end of 2017. So that speech, 23rd of January 2013, is the point at which David Cameron made that commitment to hold a referendum. He said that that referendum, were the Conservatives to win the election in 2015, that referendum will happen by the end of 2017. That was purely a decision made for internal party management purposes, and that was not done with any consultation, not only with any other centre-right politicians in any other EU country, but also not with any other EU institutions. As we'll come to see, that 2017 date is one of the biggest problems that's facing David Cameron with his renegotiation just at the moment. What then happened was, of course, the Conservatives won in 2015, contrary to their own expectations, and indeed contrary to what the pollsters were saying. I've been told by some Brussels-based journalists, I can't vouch for the veracity of this, but I've been told that the Conservatives themselves were thinking and planning that they were going to require another coalition, and that there would be some necessary deal between them and a coalition partner about relations with the European Union. The difficulty then for Cameron was, having won the election rather surprisingly, he surprised himself and didn't have a full plan about what to do with this referendum, which he himself had committed to in 2013, which he'd not himself wanted to commit to in 2013 either. Now, I've got no guarantee that that is true, but it sounds to me a plausible theory. Okay? Moving on then to the second point. Why are UK-German relations important in this? David Cameron's premiership in the UK has coincided with German preeminence in the EU, predominantly as a result of the 2008 financial crisis. And Germany, throughout all of David Cameron's premiership, has been governed by a centre-right dominated coalition. Yeah? First of all, with the CDU-FDP, and then with the Grand Coalition with Merkel-CDU as the principal partner. This has led, in as far as the Conservatives have a tactic for what they want to do at the European Union level, to the assumption that Germany is central to whatever UK's demands are. You may have read Ian Duncan Smith was quoted at the Conservative Party conference earlier this month as saying that Germany is petrified at the prospect of a UK exit from the European Union. David Cameron and the Conservative Party judge Germany's role to be central for whatever the UK might want. Seen from Berlin, it doesn't look this way. Anyone that I've spoken to across the political spectrum, people in lobby organisations, some people I know in the German BDI, which is the equivalent of the British CBI, it is not that Germany is petrified of Britain leaving the European Union. It is more that Germany is confused, or the German political establishment is confused about why the UK has gone this far and why the UK would want to make such a demand. There is an understanding, to a certain extent, for David Cameron's predicament and for the British predicament, but it is not a degree of being petrified. If Britain votes to leave, Germany thinks the European Union will go on. It thinks that actually, and there are some, and this idea is mounting within the German political establishment, it might actually make some things actually easier to run at European Union level if the pesky Brits were to leave. That position is not as prevalent in Germany as it is in France, but there are some people, particularly those on the left in German politics, who you will find who might be willing to say exactly that. The British Conservative Party plays very heavily on the supposed very close relationship between David Cameron and Angela Merkel as people. The fact they point to things like the Messeburg meeting in 2013, they invited Angela Merkel to come and address the United Houses of Parliament in the UK this spring. I think that's overdone. I don't know really who is very close to Angela Merkel. She maintains good relationships with lots of different people. I don't think there's anything particularly special about her relationship with David Cameron. You only need to look at what happened last week when she and François Hollande jointly addressed the European Parliament in Strasbourg. You cannot conceivably imagine that Angela Merkel would stand up next to David Cameron addressing the European Parliament in Strasbourg, whereas it's perfectly understandable and kind of normal part of the course that she that she would stand there with François Hollande. All of this leads to a kind of a mutual misunderstanding. If you're really interested in this, I can highly recommend a December 2014 report in Spiegel, unfortunately only in German. I tried to persuade them to translate it into English as well, by the former Spiegel London correspondent Carsten Volkeri, who's a very perceptive journalist. He accompanied a Bundestag delegation to go and meet their counterparts in the EU Affairs Committee of the House of Commons. And it's both a hilarious and very alarming report, because both sides are completely talking past each other. And it's well worth, if you speak German, it's well worth Googling for that and looking that up. And it's into that environment that therefore so both sides realise the relationship is important to a certain extent, but there's a mutual lack of understanding. And indeed, the UK thinks it has more leverage over Germany than Germany actually thinks is the case. If push comes to shove and the UK demands too much, Germany will be able to tolerate Britain leaving the European Union. And David Cameron, I don't think, and indeed the quote from Ian Duncan Smith I mentioned earlier, I don't think David Cameron has seen and has understood that. There are a number of milestones or issues which have caused some tensions in British-German relations at the European Union level. And those always seem to be rather conveniently forgotten by the British press and rather conveniently forgotten by the British Conservative Party. They are the December 2011 veto on the European Stability Mechanism Treaty. This was David Cameron going off to Brussels and vetoing a treaty in order to manage to basically stabilise the Eurozone. The problem was the 26 other EU countries, Croatia hadn't joined at that stage, the 26 other European countries just went ahead anyway, so David Cameron was marginalised 26-1. It also didn't stop his Chancellor George Osborne at that time lecturing the Eurozone about its poor quality economic performance, which didn't go down too well in Brussels either. Then in summer 2014, I wouldn't say that the German CDU was super keen on having Jean-Claude Juncker as president of the European Commission, but nevertheless he was the nominee of the political family of the European People's Party, and essentially David Cameron put himself into a corner, this time outvoted 26-2. Only Viktor Orban, and we know how far right he is, were allied with David Cameron to try to oppose Jean-Claude Juncker's nomination as European Commission President. So there was Merkel could potentially have tolerated some other candidate. That wasn't the thing. It was essentially he was the nominee of the centre-right political family that David Cameron had left back in 2005 the decision, 2009 the practice. And then what has happened subsequently over the summer of this year with regard to Britain's response to the refugee crisis has further deepened the difficulty. You had the UK that was willing to take so few Syrian refugees, while at the same time Theresa May was going off to Brussels and lecturing other justice ministers and home affairs ministers about how Schengen was not working and a borderless Europe was not working. Again, that didn't go down too well. And when pressure in the UK forced David Cameron to take 20,000 Syrian refugees over the course of this current parliament, David Cameron was very clear that those are going to be people coming directly from refugee camps in the neighbouring countries from Syria, and no help and assistance was going to be given to other European Union countries. So each of those things has been the UK losing political capital, particularly with Germany. There was an interesting article in the Daily Telegraph yesterday by its new Europe editor, which essentially, even the Daily Telegraph is essentially portraying Britain as the nasty country in Europe just at the moment. And if the Daily Telegraph is saying that, then imagine what other newspapers in other European countries are saying. On the German side, the German equivalent of The Daily Show in the United States, there's no quite equivalent of it in the UK, the Heute Show by the German state broadcaster ZDF, they have a sketch from May of 2015 entitled Extrawurst, So why Britain is always demanding an extra Wurst, like an extra sausage, all the time from the European Union. If you can make German comedy out of Britain's demands in the European Union, that demonstrates that maybe this understanding of perhaps Britain overplaying its demands actually goes quite deep into German society. So, last but not least, what's on Angela Merkel's mind in an EU context at the moment? It's solving issues to do with the refugee crisis. It is ongoing issues, although they're not top billing in Brussels just at the moment, but dealing with the ongoing tensions in the Eurozone and dealing with Greece. It is trying to work out what the hell to do with the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which is being derailed at the moment by a number of different factors. The UK issue is at best an irritant in that context. There is a European Council meeting happening tomorrow in Brussels, and dealing with the British EU question has now been completely removed from the agenda because the British have not made any concrete enough demands to justify any of the 28 heads of state and government's time to even talk about what those UK demands even are. Right? That is not least because of the 2017 timetable that David Cameron has set, because no one has any interest at European Union level of opening up the Pandora's box of the European Union treaties between now and 2017. Talk between now and 2019, 2020, something like that, and you might be in a circumstance where something may begin to change. But between now and 2017, with French presidential elections scheduled for May 2017 and the German Bundestag election for September of 2017, there is no hope of opening up the European Union treaties between now and 2017. The additional potential spice in this is Britain holds the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union in the second half of 2017. So try finding a time and a way and a means of finding a way out of all of that little conundrum. Right then, so to the third point. What is actually going to happen? All right, and this becomes very, very difficult. It's been reported that Angela Merkel has been critical of David Cameron's tactics in dealing with this referendum, because whenever he deals with something in Brussels, it inevitably leaks. All right? People within his party, one way or another, and indeed Brussels is notoriously leaky anyway, so even if it's not David Cameron or his own, or someone close to the British government doing the leaking, it will be some opponent of David Cameron somewhere who will be doing that leaking. That therefore means that to try to work out what the British are actually wanting in the European Union just at the moment is very, very difficult. Basically, the argument goes, we can't make concrete demands because if we do, they will leak, and the backbenchers in the Conservative Party won't like whatever those demands are. So therefore, we can't publish any demands. But the difficulty is this is supposed to be a negotiation between the UK and the rest of the European Union. That implies both sides state their case and they're supposed to talk to each other and find common ground. It's pretty hard to conduct a negotiation if one side is not actually saying quite what it wants. David Cameron gave an interview a couple of weeks ago to the Daily Mail in which he said that negotiating in Brussels was bloody hard. Well, it really is bloody hard if you actually are not really negotiating. You're essentially making vague claims about what you may potentially want. David Cameron also repeatedly says Britain's relationship with the European Union, to use his words, is not working. But the difficulty is his previous government's research into that issue demonstrated precisely the opposite. Right? The UK government conducted between 2013 and 2015 its so-called competence reviews. Every UK government ministry looked at its relationship with the European Union and tried to identify areas of improvement or potential areas where the relationship was not working. An enormous piece of work, a total budget estimated to be £20 million spent to do all of the research in order to manage to produce those competence reviews. And it broadly came up with the answer that the relationship in practical terms seemed to work relatively well. There was no argument ongoing for Britain to join the Euro or to join Schengen. But nevertheless, things relating to the single market would generally seem to be at a level where things were workable. But David Cameron keeps on insisting on this issue, that Britain's relationship with the European Union is broken. So what's the UK actually trying to do? The UK has a number of demands, in as far as we can tell from leaks, from articles which have been written by Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary. They are roughly as follows. That Britain should not be obliged to ever longer follow that the EU should become an ever closer union. The difficulty is that is a misreading of the European Union treaties in the first instance, because it says the European Union should become an ever closer union of the peoples of Europe, not of the states of Europe. There is also a political clarification from a year ago that essentially says this in no way precludes the European Union developing into some sort of multi-speed union. Right? Basically, if other countries wish to accelerate ahead and Britain wishes to stay where it is, that's okay within the context of that. The difficulty with that one as well is no one quite knows what it means, but it's also written in the European Union Treaty. So if you wish to change that one, you require treaty amendment. That requires unanimous agreement of 28 European Union countries, and that therefore probably will require a referendum in Ireland at least, and potentially elsewhere. So that's a really clever one in the sense that no one knows quite what the purpose of demanding that is, and it requires unanimous agreement of all European Union countries in order to get it. The second is matters relating to freedom of movement. All right? Here there are two connected issues. Right? David Cameron and Philip Hammond paint this idea that Britain is a generous welfare system and people come to the UK in order to claim benefits here. That is actually nigh on impossible to do under European Union law. We have the clear November 2014 European Court of Justice case, which was actually a case relating to Germany. A Romanian lady had come to Germany, had wanted to claim unemployment benefits immediately and had no intention of working, was denied those benefits because you need to have come to Germany in order to work, took the case to the German courts, lost, took the case to the European Court of Justice and lost. So the principle is established that you cannot move to another European Union country only in order to claim benefits. The European Union case law is clear as the light of day on that. The complication in the UK, and no other European Union countries, Germany included, really quite understand this, is the amount of in-work benefits that are paid in the UK, i.e. tax credits, because in most of the rest of the European Union, if you're working, you're not so horribly poor, so as to mean you need the government to top up your pay packet. So the extent to which in-work benefits is important in the UK rather perplexes the rest of the European Union, because they don't have the same problem. So there might be some way and means or moves around that, where the UK government itself, within what's possible in the European Union, could probably change the UK benefit system in order to manage to get away with something, but it will be very, very minor. Also, the aim, which was essentially to basically say, don't come to the UK because you can't claim benefits. Well, actually, if you ask and you do opinion polling on why do people come to the UK, they don't come to the UK to claim benefits anyway. They come to the UK in order to work. Right? And if you look at the statistics of the amount paid into their taxation system by non-British EU citizens in the UK, they pay much more in than they take out. So actually, even if Britain can manage to find a legal way of getting what it wants there, it won't actually probably have the desired effect of driving European Union citizens away in the first place. The third demand is some sort of guarantees for non-Euro members that this European Union single market will not come to be just essentially a Eurozone single market. Yeah. We don't know how that works or exactly what that means just at the moment, but maybe there's a legitimate claim in there. Although bear in mind that the UK is going to have rather few allies, even those other countries like Denmark and Sweden that are not in the Euro and have no intention of joining the Euro are not particularly bothered by that issue on an everyday basis, but maybe you can find some political declaration there. And the fourth is the role of national parliaments. I think that this is a bit of a red herring. This is basically the idea that when David Cameron says the European Union is not adequately democratic, he doesn't think you can make the European Union democratic at the European Union level, i.e. you'll never hear him mentioning the European Parliament, for example. He thinks that democracy comes only through national parliaments, and therefore arming national parliaments and giving them more power is the way and means of democratising the European Union. The problem is he doesn't seem to have read the Treaty of Lisbon, which already institutes a so-called yellow card and orange card system, which basically means if national parliaments in 2/3 of the European Union countries get together, they can force the European Commission to reconsider legislation. I.e., there is already a procedure in the treaties for national parliaments to have a say over European Union business, but the national parliaments don't use it. Right? It took the UK House of Commons 2 months after the election to get round to even electing a chair of the European Scrutiny Committee in the House of Commons. National parliaments actually don't give a damn about European Union business because you don't win elections really on the basis of European Union stuff. So the idea essentially of democratising the European Union through national parliaments probably doesn't work because national parliaments don't care about it and the powers exist in the treaty already. But the UK keeps on demanding something about national parliaments, okay? For reasons which, as I see it, are not altogether clear. Some interpretations of that say one national parliament would be enough in order to manage to force the European Commission to reconsider, i.e. reintroducing some kind of veto issue. If that is the demand, then other European countries are not going to agree to that. This then leads us to this situation where what is going to emerge out of all of this? Right? At best, David Cameron is going to get something that's rather vague and is not going to be adequately reassuring to most of the members of Parliament in his party. The difficulty is, and the Daily Telegraph had a piece last week about this, was, well, actually, does this matter, right? Why don't we just vote on the relationship as it is, right? Stick with what we've got or leave. The difficulty is the UK, and this comes right back to the Thatcher thing, I've come to the opinion that it's not about what the demand is, it's not even about the specifics of the national parliament system or the movement works in practice, and it's definitely not about Britain actually succeeding in getting what it wants in the European Union for the entire European Union. Yeah? David Cameron keeps on about trade, he keeps on about the digital single market, he keeps on talking about a single market in energy. So if Britain pushes the European Union, but its entirety in one direction, that's not enough. The feeling is that Britain has to win at the expense of the rest. And if Britain keeps on pushing that line, it's not going to get much favour in Germany, and particularly not much favour in France. So this is coming at the moment, as I see it, to a rather delicate juncture, in that David Cameron's room for manoeuvre at European Union level is extremely restricted, at the same time as he is also not yet set a date for the referendum. He keeps on pushing it into the future. There was a talk that we would know the date before the summer of this year. That got postponed until thinking he would say it in his Conservative Party conference speech, which he didn't, because he said we need to talk and we need to get a good deal first. But anyone who's ever negotiated in European Union business, or perhaps in any business, knows you need a deadline in order to manage to gain some leverage, in order to manage to force the hand of the people that you're negotiating with. The more that you postpone, the more that you dither, the weaker your negotiating position potentially comes. So the situation is extremely delicate. The idea that David Cameron may actually just simply be hit back by Brussels to basically go, we're very sorry, we are not granting you this, should not be discounted. The idea that David Cameron could potentially react in a rather emotional manner in the way that he did over the Jean-Claude Juncker situation, and that he might even switch to the no side, should also not be entirely discounted. And in that situation, that actually then makes Germany's response relatively easier. It essentially portrays David Cameron as being having overplayed his hand, as the UK having behaved in a slightly petulant manner at European Union level, and that is the argument that is basically used to shore up the rest of the other 27 member states against the UK. Now, I hope it doesn't come to that, but that shouldn't be discounted as a possibility. If we look at the opinion polls just at the moment, Remain has a small lead over Leave. And if you look also at the opinion polls of the waverers in the British debate, the 15% of the population that's undecided, which politician do they trust most in this? David Cameron. I saw the lady at the back wince to a certain extent when I said that. I feel very much the same. But nevertheless, those are the facts of the matter that we have to contend with. So I will stop there. That's essentially my thesis, and I'm obviously open for all of your comments and questions. Thank you.